Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl I Love, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl I Love, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, and I have a fantastic guest with me today. She is one of my FemiNinja All-Stars. She has been on the show before, and her name is Dr. Carlys Hudson. So, Carly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me back again. I'm so delighted to be here with you.
Well, it was so much fun the first time that I just wanted to have you back again. Plus, I felt like there was so much more we could talk about.
There's always so much more we can talk about. I mean, I just talked with you for an hour, 2 hours last week, and there's still so much more that we can talk about.
I know. I do believe that when we first met, I think we had a 2-hour lunch, but I'm not sure.
I think so.
And that was the first time we ever talked to each other.
Yes, I remember the giant burritos that we went to Las Caras. But yeah, I think it was like a half hour. We'll see how this turns out. And then it turned into oh crud, I have to get back to my patients.
Exactly. So tell us just a little bit about your chiropractic journey, because you have had such an incredible life's journey and your process to get to where you are right now. And you truly are someone I admire so much because you're a lifelong learner and you don't take no for an answer.
Well, that is true. Actually, I take no for an answer, but for me that propels me to do the opposite. So it doesn't quite get you where you want to go.
It's a catalyst.
It's a catalyst. It is. Something my husband struggles with, but I think he's found a good workaround. I know it's his favorite feature of mine. But yeah, chiropractic came on a series of a lot of different choices back to back. I started into, and I know something we've talked about before, but I started into alternative medicine because that's where my own health history took me. I suffered from H-flu meningitis when I was about 7 months old, maybe 9 months old, and it left me with a lot of brain damage. I have cerebellar brain damage. That's the part of your brain that controls how you're coordinated, how you move, your coordination of speech. It's the part of your brain that when you've been drinking a lot lets you wobble all over the place like you don't know where you are.
And slur your words
and
as well?
slur your words,
there
yes.
You go.
So I have that as a natural built-in feature. So, Western medicine saved my life, but it was alternative care that gave me quality of life. It was massage and acupuncture that helped me deal with all of the symptoms that I was left compensating well. I was a massage therapist. I became a massage therapist to help pay to get through grad school when I thought I wanted to be a psychologist because I didn't like participating in research. But once I got my hands on the body, it was illuminating to me to see what we could change in ourselves, both mentally and emotionally, as well as physically, when you start to deal with these ingrained patterns. And I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with seeing what my clients could do by changing the tissues, by changing their muscles, and teaching them how to carry themselves a little bit differently. And then I always knew I wanted to be a doctor, and I started getting into that gray area of, I'm not diagnosing you, but... So I met a chiropractor when I lived in Boston, and he just lit me up about the whole progress. And I went to chiropractic school so that I could continue on this new love affair of mine. It's new old. I've always loved anatomy and physiology. I just never got there. So this love affair of mine about what's happening in our bodies when we talk about biomechanics and muscles and bones, and that's kind of the standard stuff of chiropractic. But you add in neurology, which is another specialty that I got involved with to continue to heal my history. There's a chiropractic neurologist, functional neurologist, who was the first person who said, I see your symptoms and I know how to fix them. And so as we access the brain and our neurology to change how we move and how we engage with the world, everything blew open for me. And for the first time in my life, my right and left sides felt coordinated. I could stand on one foot. I knew when I started to lose words and slur my speech, where it was coming from and what I had to do to change it. I couldn't consider myself broken anymore. I understood what was happening. And So
it sounds like it was incredibly empowering for you.
Yeah, it it gave me control over what was happening in my life instead of being the victim of all of these symptoms that left me saying, no, I can't, but I wish I could.
So there are two things I wanted to highlight there because they're the word, the victim. And you had control over your body instead of being at its mercy.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people feel that they are at the mercy of their body or at the mercy of the diagnosis that they have been given. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up, that I just love what you said about changing the tissues, because when we think about the human body, especially as a lay person, I think often we think of bones, you know, and especially if we break one. Muscles, they kind of move or they don't, or they get stiff. And I don't think that people understand how malleable and how plastic the human body really is.
It's a phenomenal change, and just where to dive in first. The human body is so malleable. It's so ever-changing. The problem becomes with the rigidity of our environment and our behaviors, not within ourselves. We have this ability to dramatically change how we move and engage and where we experience, if any, pain and discomfort in our body simply by making different choices about how we use it. And whether that comes from a big, heavy diagnosis or just I have chronic back pains, that all of those things are at our fingertips to shift and make more what we'd like to see in the world, see within ourselves. So when it comes to being a victim of our body and a victim of our diagnosis, as I do more of these podcasts, I hear more often, my goodness, if you can do this, then any of us can. And I hear that it's meant as a compliment. But what I mean to say is I'm really not that special. I've been to enough therapists to tell me that. That we all have something. We all have some story. And I think the group of people that end up struggling the most that say, are the category that say, I'm not sick enough to matter. I'm not in enough pain to matter. I don't have this heroic story of brain injury and a life spent falling apart and oh my goodness, what it must have been like to be you. Well, that's just me and my story. I care about, especially when I'm working with my patients, what's it like to be you? If you have chronic back pain and that keeps you from gardening and that is your passion and your love, that's heavy and that's big. Or if you're trying to keep up with your grandkids or your own children, that's what matters. So trying to put anyone on a pedestal saying their pain is greater than mine, I shouldn't even feel like I have to touch it, I think that's a huge loss and a disservice to dramatize anything like that.
Well, it's kind of disrespectful to yourself when you say, oh, well, I really don't have that much pain or I've never experienced this. You're actually diminishing your own experience of what's going on in your body. And then if you don't pay attention, it starts to spiral out of control, or it can.
Absolutely. And then you do get that big story that you were asking for. Or
Yeah.
not asking for.
Yeah. And a lot of us have those big stories, and we're still trying to get over them. But I still think that you are very special.
Oh, thank you.
But like you said, I think we're all special,
Yeah.
and we all have an incredible inner brilliance that is just wanting to shine forth.
I agree.
And the obstacles or the roadblocks that are put in our way for whatever reason, be it chronic pain, injury, an accident, or even our own mental blocks of,
Absolutely.
I can't do this, I'm not smart enough, good enough, experienced enough. It's how do you take those away?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. I think that the last series that you say about I'm not smart enough, good enough, valued enough, that's the piece that I see ends up stopping people the most. Is that, am I worth the effort to put into myself what I think I deserve, or what someone is telling me I deserve more often than not? I have a lot of patients that are caregivers of some kind, and the biggest struggle is for them to find the few minutes a day to take care of themselves in front of other people. And there's often a value conversation about, do they deserve it? if they're not taking care of their children or an aging parent or a suffering spouse, they're being selfish. And unfortunately, it's mostly women who feel this way. Our value is determined by what we can do to serve others. And for me, I think the answer is going to be different for everybody else. But I came to find out, and honestly, I think people who have some more dramatic stories actually get their answers easier because we have no choice. So I had no choice but to find out early on that if I don't take care of myself, I am useless to, well, first of all, myself and those around me. I won't be able to spend time with the people I love if I'm so exhausted that I can't see straight. So I had to put myself first from the very beginning to have any kind of life. And I had a very low threshold for that. And there's something ubiquitous about that, that if we don't put ourselves first, we have nothing to give. And we get that backward. We think that if we have nothing to give, then we have no self. And it's valuing that core sense of belonging that becomes so important.
Wow, that was beautifully said. I really, it was very eloquent, and I know you were just kind of like pulling that out, but it was coming from a place that was very deep and heartfelt.
I feel really strongly about it. I think that what I do in my practice, I teach a lot of biomechanics, I teach a lot of exercises, but this idea that gives someone self-worth to see what they can do more of in their life, and the excitement that comes from overcoming those obstacles. That's why I wanted to be a psychologist in the first place, is we have to take care of ourselves. We have to see that value. And when people see me and what I've done with my practice and what I'm moving forward with in my life, it's, my goodness, that's a lot of hard work. And how do you keep finding the energy, and how do you keep spinning out? And for me, it's like, that's easy because I'm taking care of myself first.
Plus, because of your history, you're used to hard work.
That's a little bit true.
Yeah. And anything worth having really does not come easily.
No.
And hard work is something that, it does pay off. And I mean, I've seen that even when I had my own practice, because when I worked with my clients, I used a lot of Feldenkrais, which then is not only just the movement, but it really impacts your self-image.
It really
and
is.
It does something to, your whole belief system when you realize, oh my goodness, what have I been doing to myself all this time? But a lot of the self-image issues that we have are belief systems that were created by stories that have been told to us even by other people when we were younger.
Absolutely. I mean, we all have this lesson that is somehow constructed for us in our childhood. We're not, I'm looking at my 2.5-year-old and wondering.
Who is adorable.
Who is just the most beautiful little girl, and you'll never meet anyone sweeter. Totally unbiased opinion. But my little girl Matilda, as I try and do the very best I can by her and demonstrate what it could be for a woman to become a doctor, which I really hope that when she is an adolescent, this is like a non-issue. In fact, every doctor she's met has been a woman, and that's just
cool.
kind of cool that it's not the experience I had as a kid. But what story is she getting? Is she going to have to work through, given that her mother was working and not at home, and her dad he's working as well, but he works from home, and so he's there more. This is a different spin on what is still a cultural norm, and the way we have chosen to enact this is going to be something that when she's in her 30s sitting talking to somebody is going to be, gosh, I got this impression. And we're all going to have some story to work for, despite the best interests of those caring for us.
Well, I was actually the third child in 4 years. My mom had three little girls in 4 years, if you can believe that.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. And then they took like 5 years off.
Smart.
Well, I think it was by who had the energy really to procreate at that point. But because I was the youngest of the three and I was the smallest, physically I was just very delicate compared to my two older sisters. So they were always watching over me and kind of like yanking me out of trouble and all that kind of stuff. And
coddling.
Well, the scar on my leg wasn't from the coddling. It was from my two older sisters.
Okay, so not so much.
Not so much.
Yeah.
But I was always kind of like told, sit back, no, you're too delicate, you can't do this, or, no, don't do that, and you're not as smart as the other one and not as athletic as the other one, so, just sit there and don't do anything. And I'm the one, I think, that just like you, when someone says you can't do something, that just lights a fire under me.
Oh my goodness, does it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was, out of 5 of us, I was the first one to actually leave my hometown. And I was 21, had my college degree. 3 days after graduation, the ink was still wet on the diploma, and my high school, or not, my college roommate and I were driving across the country, coming to Denver from Pittsburgh. So it's just kind of crazy. Yeah. But to find that kind of, people tell me a lot of times that I'm adventurous, and I don't think so. I think I'm incredibly cautious. But how people see me and how I see myself is completely different.
I agree. I get told that I'm adventurous and that I take a lot of risky leaps.
You do.
Well, but they're very calculated. And I don't think that I am that... Okay, I put a lot on my plate at one time. I can't argue that. But when I do, I look at where I've come, from where I've come, and where I want to go. And there is this logical connection, this logical bridge that to me, I'm just walking over a bridge. That if I want to do this thing, then I better just go for it. And apparently that looks like a really big leap and a really big risk, but I see no other way when it's laid out in front of me.
Well, plus you're taking it one step at a time.
Yes.
And I do want to just review, because I think this is a fascinating story, and I think my listeners would really appreciate it, because when we first met, I was right across the street working, I had my own office, and you were working, were fairly new, and you were working with another chiropractor who was functioning more like a mentor, and so you can get some experience under your belt. And that didn't work out so great, and you knew.
It did. I had worked with this other chiropractor for about, I had been her associate for 3 months, and I had worked under her as an associate doctor for 6 months. And I think we just had some... what am I trying to think of here? Some lack of clarity at the onset. Expectations, that was the word I couldn't find. We had missed expectations at the onset, and what we were both wanting out of this situation wasn't coming to fruition. And it was getting harder and harder to try and keep managing our way back to it. And so at the time, I was 3 months pregnant with this adorable little girl.
Perfect child.
Perfect child. And that was the risk, that I had a longer period of time to work with this doctor, but the end was already coming. And the way I like to talk about it is the situation I was in had an expiration date. And then it wasn't going to start smelling so good. So
it was going to start rotting.
Yeah. It didn't have the longevity that we hoped it would. So I could either sit and wait for the expiration date, wait for passively for things to fall apart around me or to stop working around me, or I could take control of it while I still saw just a lot of opportunity in front of me and go. So this doctor and I had a couple of heart-to-heart conversations, and we both agreed that it was going to be better for each of our practices, each of our futures, to just say it didn't work the way we thought. I learned an incredible amount from her. It was a wonderful place to start straight out of school, to have mentorship and guidance to see how a practice could be run. I definitely didn't want to do that right out of graduation, right out of the gate. But after 9 months, I was surprisingly comfortable with the idea. So...
Well, speaking of 9 months, because you were 3 months pregnant, and you signed a lease, so you had your own office, and knowing that you were going to have a baby 6 months later, and you would not be able to work for a while, you would be on maternity leave, and thinking about you wouldn't be able to work, trying to find somebody else to run your practice as you're starting a practice. I mean, that overwhelms me right now, just thinking about it. But you did it, and you did a fantastic job of it.
It all just happened. To me, it was about, it ends up being getting in the flow. And that's how I know that I'm walking over a bridge and not leaping into a cavern, free fall.
Or a moat filled with alligators.
Yeah, I'm not going to get eaten alive. Is that as these things start moving, it just starts working. And the look on your face was the same look on my husband's face. I was like, so we had this plan about me making money working for another doctor while we literally grew this family. I'm just going to switch that a little bit, and I'm going to have almost no income to start. But it all worked. So I had a short period of time to maintain a consistency in my patient care, and I just started Googling and looking for offices. And I found this just big enough little offices. I'm still nostalgic for it. It's just adorable. And in this building here on Colorado Boulevard. And it turns out that the entire building is rather filled with wellness professionals. So it just had this great vibe of this is where I'm going to go. And I got to talking with, now how did I even meet Brenda? Dr. Brenda Beckers ended up doing my maternity leave. I think I met her through the CCA, but turned out she had graduated from my same university 2 years before. And she was closing her practice. Owning a larger practice, renting out rooms, hadn't been working for her. So she was closing her practice and selling all of her things. And so the very table that sits in my office right now, this beautiful purple hydraulic table, she sold to me at a steal. And we got to talking, and I said, so what are you going to do? She said, well, I'm going to work for the CCA, but I'd love to do some interim leave coverage for people. It's like, you know what?
Wow.
Would you like to come and do mine in about 6 months? So she came and covered my practice for I took about 2.5 months off. I started a little bit before my daughter was born because I was having prodrome contractures. I was having practice labor because I had a very physical job. And came back. Matilda was born over the holidays, so there was a lot of holiday closure anyway. When I started my practice, about 25, 30 patients came with me from my previous doctor's office, so I had a really reasonable, small practice to grow while I was pregnant. I worked with a fantastic business coach, and everything just flowed down to the very point that my practice is called the Healing Ground. So I love trees and tree imagery, and I went over to Pier 1 to buy some stuff to hang on my wall, and I kid you not, everything that was tree themed was 20% off. And to me, it's just being in flow and taking these steps that say you're comfortable, keep going, don't stop. And 3 years later, my practice has grown and grown and grown. I'm in a larger room. I'm moving to another large room in July, and I couldn't be happier.
Well, when I'm listening to your story, and I keep thinking of some of my FemiNinja All-Stars, I have landed somehow in this group of people, and a lot of them are really into, the metaphysics, the laws of attraction, the
quantum dynamic.
Quantum physics with one of them. And so I keep hearing this theme over and over and over again, and it's funny because I'm a fighter. It's like I resist. And finally, when I just said, okay, I give up, this is what I'm going to do, the universe is talking to me, and just let a couple of things go, some preconceived expectations, ideas, or whatever, things got a lot easier.
They do. And so the hardest part is letting go. And as a, rebel at heart with you.
Sisters of the Rebel Heart.
Yes.
I like that. That just popped out of my head.
I love that. Sisters of the Rebel Heart. I am in. Get a hashtag. We'll get a button.
Facebook page coming.
Done. But as a rebel at heart, that you say no, and you want to control, and you want to compress things into working. And I've tried to do that over and over again, where I should and I ought to stay in a situation, in an environment. I should follow the rules, or I should do it my way. And I just get crazier and crazier. That's when it all falls apart. So the hardest thing is saying, I'm going with it. And then everything after that is easy. It's hard work. I mean, I'm busting my butt, but it's easy. And it's worth it.
Well, it's really funny because I was thinking about that, going with the flow and the resist and all that type of stuff. And it's really funny how when you do let go and things just happen, and it's like you don't have to fight anymore.
Right.
And it saves so much energy, and it saves so much time. But letting go really is a hard thing to do.
It's the hardest piece, I think. But you're right. When you do, everything comes in peace with it. It was when I decided to launch my own podcast, it was the same sort of, is this in flow? Is this what I ought to do next? And within 3 months, I had been invited to be on 4 different podcasts. And I met the guy that is now producing my podcast. And all of the pieces just fell into place because while I had been thinking about wanting to do public speaking and education my whole life, figuring there was some nugget in the story that I had lived, I hadn't been doing anything that prepared me for it. I stayed nice and safe in my little treatment room, one-on-one, and I realized this is what I want. I want this life where I can travel and educate and reach more people. Am I doing anything to get there? And the answer was no. So the question began, where's the bridge that will? And the bridge appeared.
So you have a podcast.
I do.
And it is a wonderful podcast. I was on it. And
I've had some great guests.
Yeah, so far some great guests. Yeah, it was a great time. It was a great interview. You're a natural at it. So I want you to tell us just a little bit more about your podcast, the name and the theme, and then I want you to tell us too the big new thing that you're incorporating into your practice.
Absolutely. And the new thing is yoga, to spoil the ending, but that's where the podcast came from. So the podcast is called Healing Ground Movement. I have had this healing ground theme for my entire professional life. In body work, I had healing ground massage, healing ground chiropractic, and now we've got a movement going. And of course, there's the double entendre in there that it is about moving your body, but it's also a movement. It's a movement about owning our bodies and ourselves and making those hard choices to change our stories. So the tagline is movement with a growth mindset. And of course, we start talking about a lot of movement therapies where where you and I started talking about Feldenkrais and dance and
martial
arts. And we just covered the gamut. Started with skiing in that conversation, actually.
Wow, you have a very good memory.
I gotta memorize a lot of things. I've been trained. But that it's also about the movement we're going to do nutritionally, emotionally, mentally, so that we can make gains in our lives. So the theme and the tone of the podcast is being published here at the end of the summer in 2019. July and August, we're still sort of nailing down a date. But it's dropped in 2 pieces. There is the part that I call the expert interview, where I talk to other very smart people about how they move and how they help people. And then I pair it with a movement flow. And I'm saying movement flow instead of a yoga routine because that gets us into it's kind of a niche. I do yoga. I don't do yoga.
Right.
It's supposed to look this way. And really, the reason I love yoga and the possibility of using this in our everyday lives is that it asks our bodies to move in a lot of really interesting ways that we just don't typically on a day-to-day basis. So we match this yoga flow or this movement flow to the theme and tone of the conversation. So if we have my conversation with you is about all of this rhythm and spinal mobility that we were talking about, all of this extension and being aware and self-possessed, I paired it with a flow that was really gearing towards a yoga position, a yoga posture that is, if people are familiar with it, it's Camel Pose, where you're kneeling and then extending and looking over backwards with your arms either on your low back or on your heels. And that, to me, is about this great expression of movement and one of the ultimate openings into spinal extension that I feel comfortable teaching to unknown people online. There are much more advanced ones, but we won't go there.
And I want to really kind of emphasize that because when you're describing it, and even as you were describing it, I could see in my mind's eye that incredible flow of the individual vertebrae and the spine just moving like a wave in a wave form, kind of like the ones that are in front of us right now. But a lot of people will just, crunch into the position.
Exactly.
So when you call it this movement flow, it really is about slowing down, paying attention to the quality of the movement, what's happening inside your body, not just what does this look like.
Exactly.
And how do I want this to look?
We can make some really pretty shapes that are really terrible for us.
Yeah.
And we can make some gorgeous shapes that come from movement the way it's supposed to be.
Well, when it is coming organically. I like to use that word a lot.
like that,
when the
yeah.
movement is organic or visceral, it is so much more beautiful to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And just your audience, so to speak, just kind of lights them up too. And you can actually heal other people by your movement and the way you move.
Absolutely. And it's that piece that is, someone might say, I can't quite put my finger on it, but it just looks better. It just fills me better. And I think it has a lot to do with mirror neurons.
Absolutely.
Our bodies are full of these neurons that are meant to be mimicry in nature. And that's part of our socialization as we lived in tribes, that we mimic each other's facial expressions. But it goes so that we build rapport.
Right.
But it goes so much deeper than that into how we physically engage. And it's part of why I think you and I love chatting with each other so much, is that we mirror each other's bodies, and it feeds off of it. As I lean in, you lean in. As I lean away to make a point, you lean back to take it in. And a story is spun from that movement. So if you're watching someone crunch their way into a movement to make it look good, your body on a very subtle, subconscious level almost, is crunching right along with them. I like, that's great, but please stop. Versus this graceful inclination into it, and your body sighs with them. And so I'd like us to take, and what I work with my patients here in my office using yoga or yoga-like positions.
Love that. You're clarifying it, because it's not, I mean, yoga's great, but what you're doing is not just yoga. You're taking it to a much deeper level.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to clarify that.
And yoga itself is a much deeper level than the physical body. It's another reason why I love this practice. The physical body and the physical movement is only a couple hundred years old. And it is the deeper spiritual practice that is that 5,000-year-old yogic tradition. And it talks about the physical body and the energetic body and the mental body and the emotional body and that intuitive body. And, excuse me, all of these deeper levels that we can sink into to find unity within self. It's not just about how our body moves.
And do you think sometimes in some practices that kind of gets lost? Because I know with, I am a Pilates instructor, along with my other things that I do. And sometimes that gets lost. And some of the classes that I've gone to or some of the workshops I've taken, it's like, I don't think that this is exactly what Joe meant. Not that I would have known him. But, Joe, I mean, he would only work with people one-on-one because, he wanted to really be able to impact change in how they moved and how they felt about movement. And you can't do that in a big group class that's just trying to pound out exercises.
Absolutely. And it happens in the yoga community a lot, I think. Especially as we have so much of our world that has become so visual with things like Instagram and Facebook and podcasts and videos and all of that. The thing that we get to see, the thing that is tangible, is the shape that is made. And that's what we want to attain. I mean, how do you put a snazzy Instagram post out there about, I hit a moment of intuitive bliss, and I gotta tell you, it was phenomenal. Like, what picture is going to show that? I can take as many pictures of my coffee and a sunset as I want, and that deeper work isn't going to show up. But if I nail, and I don't because I have no balance, but if I nail some beautiful sweeping posture that a contortionist would do, then that sings. And that's what a visual world is.
Well, that sings, and it's also, I mean, even I can feel my body just like, lightening up, or just even changing. So, again, we're going back to the changing of the tissues and how the tissues can change, and you don't want to think about, I've got to change my body and make it look like this and expect to do it in a matter of a few weeks. You have to really appreciate the minuscule changes that are actually going on in a molecular level or at a molecular level.
Absolutely.
Cellular level. Oh my gosh, quantum physics, here I come.
I know. It's one of those like, that's too esoteric. I'm not sure, but I'm just going to keep walking down here and I'm about to fall in.
It does kind of pull you in once you let go of your preconceived ideas. Because, as you know, I was trained in my first career as a respiratory therapist, very Western medicine. Things were right, wrong, good, bad, black, white.
Testable, placebo, not.
Exactly, And so to go from that mindset to where I am right now, it did take quite a few years. But
it's not how we're conditioned. And
no.
it's not, most of us is not how we're raised. And But it is that flow and it is that expansiveness. And I think that was one of the biggest gifts of my childhood is I was raised with this idea of affirmation and taking a look at what lessons are being presented to us in life as a mirror of what we're experiencing. That mirror neuron, that molecular change. And so it's not that we should be so esoteric to think I just need to have a meditation practice. The physical doesn't matter. I am one with the Om. It is all the layers. We are physical beings and we can't leave them behind just yet. But if we can use our physical bodies to dance and engage with the life the way we want to, rather than feeling trapped and victimized by the pain that our environment has created, choices, illness, injury, things that we haven't had control over,
relationships that maybe we need to get rid of,
jobs, homes. I am so excited to be selling my very gorgeous home. Anybody want it? No. My very gorgeous home in the Highlands that is this very beautiful modern home with this very open floor plan. And for me, it is all of this empty space that takes so much energy to corral. I want a cute, cozy little bungalow. Our environment shapes all of these pieces in ourselves.
Yes, it
does. And it does. This gets into the woo-woo world, but we are part of all of it energetically, and how we choose to move and engage our bodies is part of all those choices. So my hope with this podcast, my intention with this podcast, is to have inspiring conversations to change the way we think about parts of our body that we may not be familiar with, parts of our body that we didn't think we had any control over, whether it's nutrition, neurological, mysterious things like our pelvic floor, like our spine, and then offer a practice that you can try and embody not just the movement principles, but, dare I say, the inspiration of what you just heard.
The inspiration as well as the feeling of exploration.
I like that so much better. Yeah. The exploration of what you just heard.
The interest, the curiosity, isn't this fascinating? That we were talking even before the podcast of how, you were kind of like showing me this funny thing that you do with your shoulder and your right rib cage, and I was like, I do that too. Yeah. And even now as we were talking, there were so many times I was like, oh, there I'm going into that pattern. But it's really funny. It's like, that's really interesting. It's not that I'm a bad person or you're a bad person. It's one of our habits and our patterns, and that's what makes us who we are. And now let's see if we can change that by changing the way we move, by exploring different movement patterns and different options.
Absolutely. And it even becomes a choice of whether you want to change it or not.
Right.
That you can get in touch with it and know, I have gone through this movement journey and changed so much, and right now I'm really okay with that habit. Yeah. But I am aware that it's there. And when I'm ready to engage with it again, we can change it, we can adjust it. But it becomes mine to decide, rather than, so that the thing that we were discussing is that I'm having this chronic wrist issue. And I could say, well, I'm a chiropractor and I push on people a lot, I adjust people a lot, and I do yoga and I just use my wrists for everything. And gosh, isn't that too bad? I'm going to live with this wrist pain forever, or get a new job. That's standard approach that you hear from a lot of people. Or the option is getting curious about, what do I do habitually and pattern in my body? And I don't just look at this in myself. I go and I ask questions. I have even people like yourself observing me, and think about what can change. And the big thing that I'm going to change, in addition to getting some really great myofascial release and some work on these areas, is from my meningitis, I'm deaf in my left ear, and I'm constantly rotating my neck and my upper torso and dropping my right shoulder. There's this spiral movement that happens in most of my day. So it amplifies the spiral that creates this tendonitis in my wrist. And that's what the curiosity is. It's not necessarily, it is what I'm doing with my shoulder and my elbow, but it is not as simple as that.
Well, The other thing, when I was just listening to you say this, and one of the things I wanted to emphasize too, as you are doing a little bit of this inventory, because as you were talking about your house, the external environment, and you were aware of that, we also have an internal environment that we really need to be paying attention to, and we're not used to that. And also, as we're going through this journey and self-exploration, the movement and the curiosity is to take away the judgment. So it's not that you're good or you're bad or you're right or you're wrong. It's just, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And we are all bodies. There's nothing inherently good or bad about any body. I am deaf. I have lack of muscle control in some areas. I have a little scoliosis and kind of a redhead. I got brown eyes and I'm about 5'5". These are all just facts.
Right.
These are all just things. And the fact that I am 5'5" means that I'm going to need you being taller than I to help me reach something. But that's not good or bad.
Right.
And the fact that I'm deaf in my left ear means that I need to be strategic about how I use myself and my body. And that's neither good nor bad either. Each of these issues can be frustrating, but they're neither good nor bad.
Well, is there anything else before we wrap up that you want to share with the audience? I mean, this has been so fantastic, and I have just had so much fun with you. I always love talking to you.
I love these conversations.
Aren't they great?
Yes.
And I really, my goal, as yours is too, I think, that we can change people's minds, that we can help change their minds, their hearts, their bodies, and to be able to achieve the highest quality of life and the highest level of function available to them, and to be able to say, it's a choice. I did it my way, and
I agree. I think that the last thing that I want to share is if we went to quantum physics, we couldn't get more out there than going to quantum physics. But if that seems like a little bit of a long walk for a short drink of water, it really is just about what you can be curious about in front of you. If there is anything that doesn't feel quite right in your body, in your mind, in your heart, in your space, be curious about what it would mean to change it. What are you willing to give up or alter or work hard at to make it look a little bit different? And that's what I did with my choices in my business and my choices in my education and parenting. I didn't set out to say, well, I'm going to do this podcast and have this public speaking career and have a flourishing practice. I better start with that right now. I started with, I need an office space and I need a table. And I should probably get some chairs.
and a plant.
And a plant. My grandmother gave me the plant. It was very nice.
It's beautiful.
But the decorations didn't even come until 3 weeks later, when I figured the grace of my patience was probably running out. But it's little pieces at a time. You don't have to jump to quantum physics and this idealized form of your life. It's nice to have an idea of where you think you want to go, but the most important step you take is to be curious about the thing that's in front of you right now and how it could be better. And
what I'm going to bring up, and how about my memory, is when we did a podcast on the FemiNinja. I can't remember when it was, but I'll post it and I'll link that, because that was the first time you were on the show. It was something you said about it all starts with one step. And I can't remember how you put it, but it was so eloquent.
I probably couldn't say it again here, but good thing you're going to link it. It's that it's just one step at a time. And good health, maybe it was that good health decisions we were speaking about more specifically at that time, are 1,000 little choices a day.
That's it. Beautiful. There you go.
It's not one big thing you're going to do to revolutionize your life. It's deciding that every time you're confronted with this negative stimulus or symptom or the thing that doesn't feel quite right, you're going to make a different choice than you did before. Every single time. Or at least, best 8 out of 10. We're human.
Exactly.
Just one piece.
All righty. Well, Carly, Dr. Carly, you are just so delightful. I just love having you as a guest on my show. We should do this again sometime.
Oh, we will.
Okay. And thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, bye now. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.